the two primary influences in the development of Zen in China was the emptiness perspective of Nagarjuna and the Yogacara, or mind-only school. Nagarjuna comes first, and his work is a destruction of the attempts to make Buddhism into a coherent philosophical system. So after that ostensibly destructive work at the start of the development of the Mahayana, that route of systematizing was cut off, but also there's possibly limited utility in simply reiterating the arguments for emptiness, which might be a reason why the school based on Nagarjuna that rose in China didn't last. So some of these creative responses that appear in the Mahayana after Nagarjuna include the fantastical allegories that we have in the Lotus Sutra, but historically the school which arose directly after Nagarjuna was Yogacara, which is often called mind only or consciousness only. The term's unfortunate because when we hear mind only, we think of idealism in Western philosophy, which is making claims about the unreality of the world. And Yogacara really has nothing to do with that. Its interest is in focusing our attention only on what we actually experience and what we can experience. So it's not making truth claims about the world, which would be involved in any systematic philosophizing of Buddhism. Yogacara says that there's 8 consciousnesses. The first 6 are familiar, so it's essentially the 5 senses plus mind, which is traditionally thought of as a sense in Buddhism. Where it's innovative is that it posits 2 further consciousnesses, which, at least in part, attempt to address the issue of self, which has obviously been an issue in Buddhism from the outset. So the 7th consciousness in the Yogacara system is ego consciousness. So it's basically that aspect of ourselves which appropriates what we're experiencing as mine, as my experience. The 8th consciousness is the pivot. So it's called Alaya consciousness, which is often rendered as storehouse consciousness. That word storehouse is a bit unfortunate, I think, because it has the connotation for us of a kind of granary reserve from which next year's harvest can be produced. But that's not the purpose of the metaphor. It's rather to suggest that our present experience derives from past experience, or our karma, if you want to put it that way. And Alaya does not specifically mean storehouse in Sanskrit. It means dwelling. So where we live, or what is usual for us, is the meaning of that metaphor. And it encapsulates something which I think that we can agree on. So we're like a little Alsatian puppy that gets bitten very young by a black Labrador, and then for the rest of our lives we look around for black Labradors to attack. And we can see that when we're sitting, that alongside all the randomness, what's coming up has a certain emotional structure to it, which is very familiar to us. So you might have habitual feelings of fear. I may have habitual feelings of anger or of indignation. But I think you get the idea. So it's not that the Alaya consciousness, the house, is full of seeds for the future. It's rather, it's full of ghosts from the past who keep half incarnating in our present experience. So the pivot for the Yogacara system is when we can see this. So when we can see the deep structure, as it were, of our experience quintessentially during Zazen, and when we can see that, that's the switch to what they would call mirror consciousness. So in other words, instead of being in this karmic tempest, it's as if we're seeing it through a mirror, or more accurately, we're the mirror, which is just simply dispassionately experiencing whatever is in front of it. And the Yogacara would say that switch then works its way back down through the previous 7 consciousnesses and transforms experience from something dualistic and something somewhat predetermined by the past into something non-dual and spontaneously engaged with the aliveness of everything in the present moment. So that's the switch. The problem with calling the school mind only is that it makes it sound quite philosophical, and calling Alaya consciousness storehouse consciousness just evokes all kinds of ideas in us which aren't very helpful. So it's easier really to think of these consciousnesses in terms of our actual experience in Zazen. So we're aware when we're sitting of this tendency to appropriate our experience as mine. We're aware of the familiar structures that our thoughts and emotions might take. And sometimes, because of that awareness, then we can experience this mirror consciousness, this pivot. So it's not something which we work and work and work and work and work towards and eventually realise and retain. It's something which we experience in the present moment and lose in the present moment. But it's the experiencing of it which is important. And that experiencing of it is like it's as if in our normal experience, strangers keep coming into our room. But somehow when the stranger opens their mouth to say what they need to say, we don't hear their voice, we hear our voice. Or, if to put it another way, when the stranger is about to start speaking, we suddenly take a plaster and place it across the mouth of that person, stopping them from speaking, and we write something on that gag, like fear or pain or something like that. So this switch is not doing that, not gagging the stranger, not failing to hear the stranger's voice, but living at this moment with the voices of all these strangers all around us, who of course aren't strangers at all.